There may be no other area of our lives where Inside Out matters more than the groups we're a part of. Think about your school and the different groups you find there. It's like everybody has their tribe, right? And it isn't like the old days where athletes were popular and smart people were nerds, and that was about it. Now there are tons of different groups that include all types of people. And no matter what you're into, when you find a group of people who are somewhat similar to you, it's natural for them to become your friends, your tribe. At the very least, they become people you can group text. When it comes to the groups we're in, there's something about us that enjoys being an insider. Maybe you've never noticed that, but we all like being in. So we all fight to be in some kind of group. That's why I love what we're talking about today. In the Gospel of Luke, chapter 10, Jesus tells a story that I think really helps clear up why we feel so conflicted about the whole insider-outsider thing. He starts by bringing up one particular group that his audience would have felt strongly about in a bad way. Jesus was talking to mostly Jewish people, but in the story he tells, he talks about another group, the Samaritans. And this would have caused a hush to come over the crowd. Actually, just one chapter earlier, Luke tells us that Jesus and his followers faced opposition from the Samaritans. They were in some ways the enemy. Jews looked down on and hated Samaritans. Therefore, Samaritans hated the Jewish people. So they lived in a mutual hatred. And back to the audience Jesus was speaking to, the Jews. A lawyer from the crowd asked Jesus what the most important command was. And you have to remember, there were 613 laws for the Jewish people. He answers, love God and love your neighbor. Then the guy asked the follow-up question, and who is my neighbor? So Jesus does what he does best. He answers with a story. A Jewish man was traveling from Jerusalem down to Jericho, and he was attacked by bandits. They stripped him of his clothes, beat him up, and left him half dead beside the road. So far, everyone is tracking. It opens with a Jewish guy. He's one of us, they're thinking. Got it, Jesus continues. By chance, a priest came along, but when he saw the man lying there, he crossed to the other side of the road and passed him by. Jesus continues by talking about a temple assistant who also passed by the man, and now the crowd was wondering where the story was going. Who was going to help this Jewish man? Who was going to step in and do what needed to be done? And they likely assumed that the hero would be a regular Jewish person just like them, but not exactly. Jesus continues with his story. Then a despised Samaritan came along, and when he saw the man, he felt compassion for him. Going over to him, the Samaritan soothed his wounds with olive oil and wine and bandaged them. Then he put the man on his own donkey and took him to an inn, where he took care of him. The next day he handed the innkeeper 2 silver coins, telling him, take care of this man. If his bill runs higher than this, I'll pay you the next time I'm here. Let that sink in for a minute. This despised Samaritan felt compassion for the beaten up Jewish man, so much that he soothed and bandaged his wounds, took him to an inn and paid for his care. Then Jesus brings the thunder. Now, which of these 3 would you say was a neighbor to the man who was attacked by the bandits? Jesus doesn't ask who was a neighbor to the Jewish man. He asked who was a neighbor to the man who was attacked. And he did that for a reason. To make a point that the most important thing about this hurt man in this moment wasn't his place inside of a group. It wasn't that he was a fellow Jew. It was that he had been abused and abandoned. Religion and ethnicity didn't matter. He was a victim. And the response by the man who asked Jesus the question, the one who showed him mercy. The man likely couldn't even bring himself to say the word Samaritan, but he got the point. The point was that one man acted. He didn't allow group identity, being in or out, keep him from doing the right thing. Then Jesus ends the conversation by saying, yes, now go and do the same. This was a story that left people feeling confused, convicted, and probably a little disoriented. Why? Because their group identity was everything. The entire temple system, which was their religious system, was based on the people's various positions in various groups. But Jesus was saying, go and be for everyone. When we are made new in Christ, we receive new life by the Spirit of God within us. We are saved to fellowship with God and to love others. We are propelled in love for God and others by the new power of His Spirit in us. And this affects the way we see those around us. We don't love our neighbor because they've become something different, but because we have. This affects the way we see those around us, which leads to how we love our neighbors. Number one, decide who's your neighbor. We'll never treat people with the worth they deserve if we aren't willing to see the worth they already have. Loving our neighbor begins by seeing them as our neighbor. When we see someone as made in the image of God, it becomes easier to treat them the way that God treats them. Secondly, decide to go the extra step. One of the things I love about this story is everything that the Samaritan did. He could have bandaged him up and left. He could have taken him to the inn and left. But he went one step further. He left extra money to make sure the Jewish man got the best care he needed and said he would pay the innkeeper any money he owed next time around. There will always be a normal and expected amount of helping people. If someone drops their book in front of you, you're probably going to pick one up and give it back. If they fall, you might reach out your hand. But what would one step more look like for you? What's one thing beyond what is expected when it comes to the people around you? Maybe that means you don't just pick up their books and hand them back. Maybe you carry the books for them. Maybe you don't just hand them napkins when they spill something in the cafeteria, but maybe you actually help them clean it up. Don't just not make fun of them, but actually stick up for them when others do. Having neighbors is one thing, but loving them will always require us to take one more step, to act, move, and take what we know to be true on the inside and begin to live it on the outside. Imagine if people who treat you like an outsider went beyond what you expected to treat you like an insider. It would change how you think about them. It'd make you want to do the same. And imagine what your school, your family, and your church could look like if we all took on this together. Go and be for everyone. I think it could change their world. I think it could change your world. And I think it's exactly what Jesus wants for you.